Oh, great. And here we go. Hmm. Says I just sent it to you, except. Yes. Here we
Yo,
are.
Shay.
You catch me
On
in the middle of lunch. Butter, ham, and cheese.
right. I just made leftover chili.
That sounds delicious.
Busy
It
day,
has
you know.
been. It's been. I've been
Productive.
productive in DC. Are you loving it?
Um, yeah, I'm enjoying myself. I'm actually going to Arkansas on Wednesday. I got some business to kind of handle down there with the family and stuff. So just kind of moving around, but yeah,
Let
life's
me
great.
stop eating because I wasn't sure. So,
So we're here. Jada, Will.
yeah, I have a lot of thoughts and feelings that I wanted to publicly process because as therapists, we have a responsibility um, to address misinformation that's circulating around what is and is not therapeutic. And I've noticed that a lot of the language that Jada uses to describe her venting is clinical language. She'll say, "Oh, this is so therapeutic for me. This is so therapeutic." And as a licensed therapist, my immediate reaction was, "No, girl, that's not what therapy is." And so I think maybe we can start off by like saying like our first impressions, and then maybe the difference between processing in therapy negative events that have happened to you and then airing your dirty laundry.
Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's great. I think when I first saw this, um, it actually made me think of I saw like the August Alsina situation, right? August, which was the guy who was part of the entanglement. And from that reality, it was kind of cringe, thinking that this guy was hanging out with the kids. And then, like, you know, they ended up in an entanglement. And so for there, it was very cringe and still is in many ways. I like to preference most of my sessions with the idea every couple has their own chemistry. And so let's be clear that, if you're into kink, if that's the lifestyle you live, then sure, your parameters are going to be a little bit different than maybe someone that engages in like monogamy. If you have uh, some different mindsets. Some people believe men are the protectors, and women are the nurturers, and then there's some people who believe that can cross diasporas, and so every couple has their own chemistry, and some couples have proverbial fights. Um, put the toothpaste back on the on the toothpaste. I'm sorry, put the cap back on the toothpaste, or I don't know. Some people put their sodas in the sink, and so there's proverbial fights, and that's okay. But for my first impression, I was like, whether it's kink or traditional or whatever, I don't think hooking up with the friends, with our children's friends, was
Yeah.
ever
And
allowed.
keeping in mind like what is and isn't sexually appropriate, right? And so having an intimate physical relationship with your children's friends sends a signal that socializing in their circle is acceptable when it's not, because your children, you are not there's this like old phrase like that moms would say to their kids, like, "I'm not one of your little friends." Jada should not be conducting herself like she's one of Jaden's little friends, right? She should not be in his social circle. That is developmentally, that is sexually inappropriate. And I'm not sure that she's aware of that. The second point is there's something called ethical non monogamy, which means before you even step outside your monogamous relationship, you have a conversation with your partner, with your spouse, about what you should be doing, what is cheating, what isn't cheating. And when Jada,
Hey, dropping gems. Sorry, Shay. She's dropping gems. Y'all need to put diamonds in the chat if you are picking this up. She is giving you all some game for free. Y'all need to
It's
pick this
true.
up.
It's
Yo,
true. Like
very
you need to define the terms of your marital contract before you engage in ethical non-monogamy. And judging just purely by Will Smith's face, she did not get it. His side, she made a unilateral decision in her marriage, which you should not do, regardless of whether your marriage is open or closed. When you make decisions, when you're in a relationship, you have to consider the person that you're attached to before you move ahead, because that can destroy the relationship.
yeah. In addition to that, I mean, I think it's really important that when you're having those discussions and you're talking about these different things and you've opened up about it, I think when we transition to the hurt, oh, no, I
Oh,
don't want to
I'm ready to
transition
go
to the
there,
hurt
but
now. It's too
please,
soon. It's too
I'm
soon.
following your lead.
Because I really just feel like in terms of the prep work, I don't, to your point, I don't think the prep work was done effectively. So if people are going to engage in these sort of things, you want to make sure that it's there. But then also, I think as it relates to the hurt, if you're going to do it, there's clinical ways to do this. And so whether it's writing an open letter of how they were hurt and then burning it, or if there's the idea of having couples counseling, but then going into separate sessions, but also making sure that there is a release stating that it's understood that whatever is talked about in these individual sessions, we can also bring them back up when we speak together. There's no confidentiality within the
I have to pause
individual sessions.
right there
And so,
because this is definitely up to the individual therapist. And you should definitely, before you enter into couples therapy, you check with your therapist and you ask them, are you going to hold secrets? There are some therapists who will hold your secret when you're an individual. So that means if you admit to having an extramarital affair, if you admit to having a second family, your therapist, regardless of what happens in the couples session, they will not bring that to your spouse. There are other therapists who will say, there are no secrets. So if you tell me something an individual, I will use kind of like my clinical skill to introduce that new material during our next group session. And so make sure you check with your therapist on what their policy is, their ethical policy, and it really just depends on the therapist. Sorry, Nick, please continue.
no, I mean when we're looking at when we're looking at like the EFT model or even the Gottman, like it is really important that you kind of define those parameters, because a lot of times when you have those individual sessions and those breakout sessions, it's actually the desire of one of the people in the relationship to have that information divulged for them because of their apprehension. And so if you're coming to counseling for that, it is okay. Like we can help you breach that conversation in terms of like, hey, I really want to be in a polyamorous relationship, but I'm apprehensive to tell my spouse. So I'm going to tell you right now during this individual session. And then when we get back together as in couples, I need you to drop that bomb and then help me kind of navigate that situation. But I don't really know what's going on with this couple. Apparently they're hurt. Apparently there's some love. Are they in it for the kids? Are they in it for? I just feel like the idea of there being financial gain
Yeah.
based off of someone else's hurt is really the
Yeah.
really unsettling
Yeah.
for me. Where
I think I hear a lot of pain when Jada's talking about her relationship, whether or not Will cheated, whether or not all of these things are irrelevant. What I hear when I listen to Jada is a woman who has not done the work to heal. And so the big difference between, Jada going to therapy and Jada doing an interview with Hoda Kotb on the morning show is when you're venting in therapy, when you're bringing your negative story in therapy, your therapist will hold space for you. And everything you say is confidential. The information will be contained in session so that when you leave the session, the information you share will not impact anyone else, right? It is your story, your therapist. When you do an interview on the morning show talking about all the many ways in which your husband has hurt you, that information cannot be contained. You could not control who was impacted. You could not control how they receive that negative information. And so when you're airing your dirty laundry, all you're doing is spreading negative information. And there's a big difference between sharing. Battery was low. My battery was low. I'll plug it in. I did bring my charger.
No,
Yeah,
there's a difference between sharing and dumping, right? And I think what we're running into with her is she's kind of dumping. Now, I don't want to discredit their absolute their valid, allowed to feel the way you feel, but your behavior, you got to kind of check some of that. And I also think that it's important that we highlight, yes, you feel the way you feel. Your behavior has been your behavior, but you still have to deal with the consequences of your behavior
absolutely.
once you
And
ground yourself.
think about,
Kanye accused. He still had
yeah,
to
I was
apologize, you
sorry,
know?
sorry to interrupt you because I think there's a delay, but I was going to add to that by saying, think about your intent. When you're sharing this information, right? What is the impact that you want to see? What's the outcome that we're driving here? And to me, it seems like she's using her story to punish her spouse. She's using her story to get a paycheck. She's using her story. It's not to uplift. And I think that's why so many people have had such a negative response to her sharing. It's because we don't get the sense that you're trying to inspire. We get the sense that you're trying to use this public forum that you have to, get a consensus, like, or to be affirmed, or right, you're telling us this information to get a reaction out of us, and we don't appreciate it, as opposed to sharing your testimony and then saying, this is how I recovered. This is how Will and I got to where we are now. They are very much in the middle of their storm, and it's getting everyone wet.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing is like, it sucks, but it's like, all right, so Shay is a
Yeah.
therapist I recommend. I'm a therapist that Shay recommends. However, a lot of times we get couples that have been to a therapist and we're like, whoa, they had you do what? And they called it ethical. How? And now they're like, I had to, it makes it worse. So try to find a therapist that comes recommended, or reach out to someone that you know that can try to give you some sort of recommendation, and trying to maneuver that situation, because I've seen some couples come to counseling and the stories that they went through before they came were really, it was really disgusting. And so when you're navigating the couples counseling,
Mm,
it's okay to have flashbacks. Flashbacks will occur. There's no time limit on when you should get over it, right? However, there should be
yeah.
some sort of progress that we're working towards. We're working towards some commonality, some understanding. Who goes to couples counseling and doesn't do communication, right? There should be some communication lessons involved in there. And you are still allowed to have flashbacks, but what we can't do is just keep poking each other, and really trying to break the other person down. And so I don't know. I really feel like, I don't know, this person that they're crediting for their therapy is
Yeah.
really worth the credit that they're receiving, because the don't seem like, I don't know, they
It
don't seem
doesn't
like
seem,
they're working
I
in
don't
this
know if
instance.
she's actually seeing a therapist or if she's just calling these interviews therapeutic, but it's not working. You need evidence based therapeutic intervention. And here's how you know if you're healing, right? We have a lot of emotional,
Yeah, get
oh,
it.
thanks.
That's a good one.
Emotional resilience, like here's what it looks like, right? You're able to recall something that happened or talk about your story with your therapist, and you don't have the same strong emotional reaction that you used to have. So there's this thing that I do in narrative exposure therapy with clients who are processing a trauma. I have them catalog traumatic events, and then I read it, right? I read the negative events, and we'll do that. We'll do through a process of narrative situation, they will read and reread their negative, traumatic narratives. And that process of narrative habituation, exposing yourself to these traumatic events and assigning new meaning to each traumatic. So you're not just reading empty. There's a processing time. You assign new meaning to each traumatic event. What happens is people actually get used to sharing this and saying, you know what? I don't feel as triggered going through this narrative anymore. I don't feel, and then of course we have a closure exercise at the end where they write a letter to their younger traumatized self, like all of the things that they wish they had known, all of the encouraging words that they wish someone would have said to them. They're going to love on that traumatized self, that younger child, in a way that no adult was able to do when they were actually in that position. And so when we're talking about how to identify whether or not you're healed, if you're still telling that same tired, I went to Rikers to visit Tupac story 30 years after it happened, that's probably a sign that you haven't done the work to heal.
Yeah. Yeah, I just saw a little snippet of that yesterday. Yeah, they say healing from trauma. The cool thing about trauma is there are a lot of approaches that actually help. Trauma is one of those things that has been researched a lot. And so there are ways to help. It's just, how intense the therapy is really up to the individuals. I think it's important to also keep in mind like I like to use the reality therapy approach as well. Like what are you doing to better your relationship? So whenever you do a session, one of the things you're going to get from it is I'm going to ask you all, what did you do this week to better your relationship? And then I'm going to ask your other partner, how was it received? And so that's something you all can do right now, right? So what are you doing to better your relationship? Literally should be asking yourself that every single week, because relationships require effort. And I'm not saying you're going to get it right, and I'm not saying you're going to be perfect. But however, if you are using some intentionality to try to improve your relationship, you should start to see gains. Because what we don't want to happen is that you're in this mundane relationship, and it's kind of like just drive through. You stop by and then you leave. Sometimes you want to park, get out the car, go inside, and actually eat with your spouse and just have that fellowship. You want to be intentional about continuing to build on your relationship and have gains. And so if there isn't, if you're not making those gains, it's like what are we doing? And so I think, because I don't know, I just had this idea. I'm thinking we should go with it. So the reality is we want to be in it for the kids. However, as therapists, we can both attest there's a certain point in time where sticking it in for the kids isn't really helping the kids, and it's making it. Jay, I
Okay,
threw you the
here we
alley
go.
oop, slam
I
dunk it.
the Scottie Pippen to your Jordan 1996, and or maybe it's the reverse since you passed me the ball and that makes me Jordan. Oh,
We could do
doesn't matter.
90. Go
So
ahead.
when you're thinking about, one thing that Jada said is, oh, we're sticking it in for the kids and I don't want to quit. Well, think about the environment that you're creating for your children. So SAMHSA, which is part of the U.S. Department of Health, has a wellness wheel. There are eight dimensions of wellness. There's occupational wellness, there's emotional wellness, there's financial wellness, there's emotional wellness, and then there's spiritual wellness, and there's environmental wellness. Environmental wellness means, well, is there a feeling of safety? So if you are yelling at your spouse, you're throwing things, you're in constantly, kind of butting heads, are you really creating an environment where your kids can thrive? Right? So this idea that two parents fighting 24/7 is healthier than one parent parenting peacefully in their home and another parent parenting peacefully in their home. That is actually a fallacy. Two parents fighting constantly is not better than two parents coexisting in separate quarters. So I hope that I slam dunked that. Maybe it was.
That was amazing. That was perfect. I think in addition to that, it's like, how do we have that discussion, as it relates to separating? And so sometimes it could be helpful to actually be a conjoined front. Now, it sounds like Will and Jada are still communicating. And so if there is that space to navigate this together, ideally do that. And so that look like, it might seem something like, hey, instead of it, hey, it's your dad's fault. Hey, it's your mom's fault. They're navigating it from a space of unity, in which it's like, hey, two people
Yeah.
not work out.
Letting your kids know, like, you're meant to be here, right? I love you unconditionally. I wanted to have you. I wanted to have this family. It's just going to look a little different now. The family unit's going to evolve. Your dad will always be your dad. I will always be your mom, right? And that's the kind of stability that they need. Consistently loving them and loving them unconditionally. That's the environment that they need in order to thrive. When it comes to explaining to your kids why you got a divorce, don't tell them. Your 5-year-old doesn't need to know why daddy cheated, whatever it is. How help? How is that going to help
Yeah.
by trashing your child's parent, right? And so if you ever get the need to like want to vent to your child, realize that that is emotionally inappropriate and it makes you emotionally immature, right? Your child is not your therapist, your child is not your friend. And so if you want to go to a go to
Woo.
a yeah,
Hey, put some dropping jewels. She just hit you guys with what? IQ and EQ? Come on, Shay. I see you. Emotional maturity and
that's it. Your child
intellectual
can't help you.
maturity.
And another thing that a lot of people, I think Jada is attempting to do this by pulling Will into the conversation. She wants Will to give her some kind of closure. And a lot of people who've been harmed by a loved one, they want that loved one to give them the closure that they deserve, whether it's a form of an apology or an explanation. But realize this, if that person never brought you peace, they can never give you closure. And so stop going to
Yeah.
your abuser for that peace and closure that you desire. They can't give it to you.
Yeah, and just to flow back on the kids, like when you're navigating a situation, it's important to tell them
Absolutely.
what's going to be different and
Yeah.
what's going to be the same. Go to the same school, you're still going to go to the bus. Instead of one house, now you have two homes. Instead of one Christmas, now you have two. So just creating those traditions and keeping the line of communication open. It can be easier said sure, but it's important that you have those safe spaces to kind of work your thought processes out, and then so you're not just dumping. And
Thank you.
oh my gosh, dumping on the kids, like it happens. It's tough, but that's not the way. We want to just leave that door open. So I encourage you all to just say, hey, your father and I are getting a divorce, or we're considering separating. And I just want you guys to kind of, do you have any questions as it relates to this? You don't have to answer it right now, but I want you to
Yeah.
know my love for you is still the same. Uh, we're not subtracting, we're
Yeah.
just adding to
Yeah.
this family.
Adding that peace. Gems for
So,
Nick.
yo, so yo, this is crazy though, right? So I hope people are really taking notes because a lot of people come to counseling, they're paying 200 an hour, and workshops and going to all these different things and self-help. Oh my God, it's $1 billion industry. You go to Nobles and you can read all the books and still be confused. But the cool part about it is you all have tapped into a source, Shay and I, who actually, we're booked up on mental health. Everyday people with a concentration in mental health. And so we're going to help you all navigate that if you ever have any questions. But the Will and Jada thing, it's
I
like, I don't
question for you.
know.
Oh wait, go ahead.
I
Finish.
think,
Finish your thought. Then I have a question about it. About Will and Jada. Go ahead.
no, it's embarrassing. Like, it really is. Like, my man slapped somebody on TV. Like, they bringing up Tupac. Like, Willie from Philly. They got rhyme schemes going around. Like, ugh,
Well,
I
my
don't know. What were
first
you
thought
thinking?
was,
What was your
what
question?
a mess. But then I wanted to toss you something that was really difficult, really challenging. I posted something on my IG story about Jada saying, well, I don't want to quit. And that's the reason she's pulling Will through all of this. And she's talking about, how she's hurting, but she doesn't want to get a divorce so that she can start healing on her own. What are your thoughts on this to people who have that struggle love, who see struggle love as a trophy, who think, oh, well, this is great. I'm going to fight with him every day, and that's better than giving up. What kind of advice do you have for that couple, for that person?
What? Struggle love. We used to call it thug
Yeah.
love when I was young. Thug love. Do you remember that? That terminology. And so, no, I think there should be a window. Every person has what we call that window of tolerance. I know you know. And so, to the people, it's like a window of tolerance is really how much emotion that they can handle. And so, with that, it's good to kind of know your partner, and it's also good to know what you're willing to put up with and what you're not. So when you're setting boundaries, don't just set them for yourself, but setting boundaries also allows other people to know how to treat you. And so you want to make sure you're setting those boundaries because you have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if you don't know the why, you're going to put up with a lot of stuff. Now, when someone is in a traumatic event, their window of tolerance tends to expand as compared to someone who has developed their boundaries before the traumatic event occurs. Excuse me. So if someone, all right, someone has a roommate, and that roommate is in, her and her boyfriend argue all the time, and it wakes her up in the middle of the night. And so she's like, next time they argue, I'm gonna call the police. Okay. By developing that plan up front, she's more likely to call the police next time they argue, as opposed to when there's a traumatic event occurring and she hears it and she's like, should I call the police? Should I not call the police? Maybe they're just fighting. Maybe they're just arguing. I don't know. I'm just going to knock. So she knocks, and then she gives more room for harm to be done. And then some more stuff happens. And then she's like, dang, I should have just called the police. Right? It's not her fault, but she's in a traumatic experience and she doesn't have a plan of action. When you come to counseling, we're going to help you develop a plan of action on how to approach a situation like that in the future. So that way you can
And,
handle it within a systematic way. And so you're not in just kind of teetering, right? And so in this instance, when you're in this situation in a relationship, you should kind of have your boundaries in terms of your goals. What are the couple's goals? What are our goals as a couple, right? Your State of the Union address. Right now we're in October, so we're in the fourth quarter of the year, October, November, December. And so what are you all's goals? Are you working towards those goals? And if the things that we're doing in our day-to-day routine are not moving us towards that 5-year plan or towards that 1-year plan, then we might have an honest conversation with ourselves and say, hey, I'm slipping, or I need someone to be more, hold me accountable. Or we're ahead of schedule. And now it's time to plan a vacation. And so I think as it relates to that piece, it's important that you set those boundaries. Now, if you're talking abuse and all these different things like that, if you're not accomplishing those goals, then you have to have that tough conversation with yourself and weigh the pros and the cons, and say, do I want to be in this relationship or should I leave? And once you evaluate those pros and cons, not just from a surface level, but take a couple of days and look at the list again. And then that's when you have to have the tough dialogue with yourself and say, this isn't where I need to be. And breaking up is easy. Let's be clear. Breaking up is super easy. The hard part is those good morning texts, those good evening texts, the how was your days, the all that intimate connection and the emotional bonding that you had. And so you all have to navigate that. But listen, we're not gonna get through all this in an hour. But that's what comes to mind as it relates to the thug passions
yeah,
of the world.
I think you're, I agree with you completely. I think one difficulty that I have with Jada and Will is that Will is, you know, he already has all of us kind of behind him, supporting him, whatever. And it almost feels like Jada in every conversation is defending herself or over explaining in order to compensate for that lack of like public support. And that's something that I want women in particular to know, that when you're on your journey of healing, you don't have to explain yourself to people who already have you or believe they have you figured out. In fact, most people will construct a narrative about you that they will cling to, either because they need to have this narrative about you or because it makes them feel better about their own, character flaws. You are not responsible for that version of you that lives in their mind. In fact, that version of you that lives in their mind is not your property and you can't manage it, right? And so what you are responsible for is how you present yourself, how you show up every day. And what that looks like is just the choices that you make, right? All of us, our character, our relationships, these things are all directly connected to the type of choices. So if you want to become a better person, make wiser choices. And that's something that I hope Jada does in session with her therapist, who I don't think she has.
Yeah. no, that was perfect. That was the kind of transition I wanted to go into, is the healing journey. There's so many places to start, right? Start within. But it's like, where, I don't know, where are we taking it? Like, where do we start? Do we just tell her get off social media and let's
Yeah,
take it
like what does that
into the
healing journey look
office?
like for Jada or any woman who feels like she is hurting and she's in the middle, she's estranged from her spouse? What does the healing journey look like? Yeah, it looks like if you notice that every time you're on social media you're sharing details of your relationship, just negative dumping, that's probably a sign that you would be better off in therapy, right? Most of the people who follow you on social media aren't licensed therapists, and even if they are, they can't help you via.
My, got my back. Right. Kiki's good for a ride to the airport. But Rachel's good for a ride to the airport. But that's not the person we want to talk to about, trying to develop this relationship and move in the right direction.
With,
Yeah,
if
I
you were to give Jada a wellness self-care plan, considering the emotional position she's in now, step by step, what would you tell her to do?
just tough. Well, first I was trying to
Mm.
evaluate what is her objective, what are her goals, and once we can define what her goals are, we can ask, this is what you're doing. Is it working? Is it not working? What do we do to make adjustments so it does work? Because the only person that we can change is who? Ourselves, right? And so that's where we kind of have to start. And so if she's willing to do that, um, it shows me that she's vested and she wants it. And so then from there, we can talk about, what does self care look like for you? Do we need to schedule 3 massages a week because looking at Will pisses you off that much? You just want to jump on a podcast and just, Willie from Philly, right? And so if that's what it takes, we can do that. And I'm here to support you. And um, honestly, it's at this point where doctors are actually offering prescriptions to massage parlors. So you can actually have it written off by your insurance. And so there's so many different things, right? We got to get her some self-care. We can do the journaling and the writing. Um, but what we can't do is continue to just try to destroy this relationship. I think that depending on her need and what she wants to accomplish, we might need to
Yeah.
meet twice a week. I'm just thinking the
You know what
timeline
I
and,
would
and what things
tell
are
Jada
looking
to
like.
do? Not even twice a week. I would tell Jada to enter into intensive EMDR therapy, to stop her book tour and for 1 week go to an EMDR specialist. It's 19 to 25 hours of therapy in 1 week. So you're with them for a long time and you're going through each traumatic moment. So all the stuff that you put in your book that you think is like therapeutic, it's not spreading negative energy. That's the stuff that you would talk about with your therapist. So I would say in either meeting with a talk therapist twice a week, meeting with Nick twice a week, or meeting with an EMDR therapist for 19 to 25 hours in 1 week. And that's what I would suggest.
And I will admit, yeah, I definitely do EMDR in my sessions, um, like a lot, especially like safe, calm space and just processing those different things with the clients. So yeah, EMDR is solid. It's I wish it was an easy fix because we also we're looking at two different things, right? We're talking about systemic issues, but we're also talking about individual personal changes. And so with this, it's important that people are aware of their social engagement and how it impacts them because it's like there's these right. So she can do
Yeah.
all of these things, but social media is still around. And so still going to trigger her. So maybe it's removing
Yeah.
yourself from social media for 30 days, decrease news that you're engaging in 30 days. Or if just people in general, like sometimes the best thing you can do to ground your relationship is the cabin in the woods with no cell phone service, right? Isolate, lock in, get bored together. But the reason that you're bored together is because you aren't familiar. And then once you all get familiar with each other, I think there should be some gains in growth. But it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out. Is it bad that I kind of want to see them win?
Well,
I want them to
me,
work.
I'm rooting for them to divorce. I'm just like, let it go, throw in the towel. It's over. But that's good. You have one therapist who's an optimist and another therapist who's like, just let it go. Just let it go. Okay, well, I think that's good. I think we did a good IG live. Like, what do you think? Or any last words?
Hmm. All right, we talked about that. We talked about the kids. We dropped some good terminology. I'm thinking that, yeah, I think we did a good thing. I think we're in a good space. I'm curious to see how it turns out. Protect your peace.
Protect
That's
your
all I can
peace.
say, you
Go to
know?
therapy. Don't social media.
Yes.
Nick, you're
Shay, it's always a
amazing. I'll
pleasure.
talk to
It
you
is.
later. Bye.
Peace.